Hello everyone, I'm Heather. It's not even the end of January 2024, and there have already been two pretty alarming stories in the news about very unusual things happening with air travel. In the first incident, which was at Tokyo's Haneda Airport on Tuesday, January 2nd, so right at the beginning of the year, a large passenger plane, JAL 516, collided with a Japanese Coast Guard aircraft on the runway and burst into flames. 5 of the 6 people aboard the Coast Guard aircraft were killed. But amazingly, all 379 people on Japan Airlines Flight 516 got out safely before the Airbus A350 was fully engulfed in flames. If you saw pictures or video from this incident, you're probably just as stunned as everyone else was that everybody on the plane got out safely. There were 14 people injured, but none of the injuries were considered life-threatening and no one died on the Japan Airlines plane. However, the Japanese authorities are still investigating this incident to find out what led to the collision. The Coast Guard aircraft had been part of a larger operation to assist with the recovery from the earthquake that had just happened in Japan right before. Just a few days later, on January 5th, Alaska Airlines Flight 1282, carrying 171 passengers, was en route from Portland, Oregon to Ontario International Airport in Ontario, California. It hadn't gotten very far and it wasn't at its full cruising altitude yet when a door plug, a faulty door plug, manufactured at a Malaysian plant operated by Boeing supplier Spirit Aerosystems, blew completely out of the plane, leaving a gaping hole the size of an airplane door in the side of the plane. The plane lost pressurization, the oxygen masks came down. No one again was injured or killed. The pilot made an immediate return to Portland Airport and landed safely. They did recover the door plug in someone's backyard in Portland sometime later, relatively intact. You may have read about what a door plug is. It's something the same size and shape as an airplane door that's put into place of an emergency exit when the number of passengers on the flight doesn't call for the need for that many doors. However, they've discovered that there were faulty bolts in that door plug. If you're already an anxious flyer or you've never flown in an airplane before, seeing stories like this so close together in the news might be enough to put you off of flying forever. But in today's video, I want to reassure you with some things that you, as the passenger on a commercial jet, can actually do to keep yourself safer when you're flying, even though I totally recognize that the only one who has control of that aircraft is the pilot. You have no control when you're on an airplane of what happens with the airplane itself. But there are things that you as a passenger can do to help make yourself more safe. So let's talk about those in this video today. First of all, I want to talk about these two particular incidents that happened with these two flights and some of the safety tips I can give you that are inspired, I guess, by these two incidents. For the first one, on Japan Airlines Flight 516, how amazing was it that everybody got off that flight safely, especially considering the fact that there were 379 people on that aircraft. And that thing went up in just massive flames. Again, if you've seen the pictures of what the airplane looked like, it basically was reduced to ash. So the fact that they all got out is amazing. A couple other things I read about that were really, really interesting to me is that the flight crew did not realize that the plane was on fire until they were alerted by the cabin crew. Let me take a moment to explain to you the difference between the flight crew and the cabin crew. The flight crew basically is the pilot and the first officer, or the co-pilot. Sometimes, I don't know if they ever have this anymore, maybe on larger flights, there might also be a navigator in the cockpit. I don't know if that's still a thing. They're also on long haul flights of some distance. There can often be more than one pilot, more than one first officer, so that they can take shifts and take turns sleeping. That's the flight crew, the ones who actually operate the aircraft. The cabin crew are everybody else working on the plane. So all of the flight attendants, and they might have different ranks, the ones who are in charge of keeping the passengers safe, comfortable, and well, okay? So that's the cabin crew. So the cabin crew is back with the passengers, the flight crew is in the cockpit. In this particular instance, the cabin crew and the passengers who could look out the window saw that the plane was on fire and had to alert the flight crew to that fact. So they didn't even realize that they were on fire until the cabin crew had let them know. If you were in an incident like this and your plane, they were landing, they had safely touched down on the runway, but the plane was on fire. So they got to a point where they were stopped. Now, I have to explain that there's a lot of things that the flight crew has to do on a checklist, step by step, in order before they could let the passengers off the plane. So it might seem like it was a long time that they were waiting, I'm sure they're like, open the doors, let's get off. But you can't actually do that. They had to try some things first. They had to take certain steps to make sure that everybody could get off the plane safely. They also had to look outside, which the passengers could contribute to helping with this. The cabin crew and the passengers had to look outside and determine exactly where the fire was to help the flight crew kind of ascertain the safety of the passengers being able to get off. Obviously, they were not at the airport itself. They were not up at the terminal. They were not connected to a jetway. They were still out on the runway. So this would involve having to use the emergency slides to get off of the plane. These are the things you can take away from that incident, and this wouldn't necessarily be something exactly the same. Your plane doesn't have to be on fire for you to use these tips. Okay, number one most important thing that you can take away from that incident is to listen to the cabin crew and the flight crew. Listen to the captain when he makes announcements. Listen to the flight attendants. Make sure you are listening to what they say. They are highly trained to handle any kind of situation like this. They're the ones who know best what you should be doing. They're the ones who are trained to get you out of the plane safely and all of that. And obviously, the crew of this Japan Airlines flight did a phenomenal job in following their training to be able to safely evacuate all 379 people aboard that plane. So if you listen to the crew, your chances are much better that you're going to be okay. So listen to the crew. Second takeaway from that incident, keep your shoes on. There's 3 main reasons you should always keep your shoes on when you're on a plane. And I totally understand. It seems like, especially if you're on a long haul flight, you might want to take off your shoes just to be more comfortable, but I'm going to tell you 3 very good reasons you should never take off your shoes on a plane. Number 1 is common courtesy. Please don't take off your shoes on a plane because your feet are probably stinky and nobody around you wants to smell your stinky feet. The second one is common sense. Ask any flight attendant, if you use the airplane lavatory, the bathroom, and you walk in there without shoes on, yuck, okay? Let's just say a lot of the liquid that you'll see on that floor of that lavatory is not water. And honestly, the same goes for the rest of the aircraft. They do not have time to clean the floor of the aircraft between every flight. They might vacuum it, but a lot of the times all the cleaning crew has time to do between flights, and this is different at night when they totally surface it, but is just pick up the trash that they see on the floor and crumbs and stuff. They don't necessarily have time to vacuum the floor, and they certainly don't have time to shampoo the carpets in between flights. So keep your shoes on. That's just good sense, okay? All right, and then the third very important reason why you should never take your shoes off on a flight is because of what happened here. If you have to evacuate the aircraft, you don't want to waste time having to put your shoes back on. And you certainly don't want to be in a situation where you're trying to evacuate the plane in a situation like here. When they got to that pavement was probably scorching hot because the plane was on fire. If you're landing in grass, if you're landing in mud, if you're landing in snow or ice, and you have to get off the plane quickly, or if you're landing water, but you might not want your shoes in that situation, but you can always take them off after. But in most cases, you're going to want your shoes off to be able to have something on your feet when you have to evacuate that plane in an emergency situation. So it's very important to keep your shoes on when you fly. I want to add one little other thing to this too. This kind of goes back to the second thing with going to the bathroom on the plane. Before you get on the plane, it's also a very good idea to wear socks. Every time I see people going through the airport, especially through security, with no socks on, you know, they're wearing sandals or flip-flops or just some other kind of shoe and they don't have any socks on, that grosses us out so much. You're walking on the, I'm sure, filthy airport floor through the security area to go through the scanner and everything with bare feet. Ew, please don't do that. I mean, honestly, in our family, we don't ever go barefoot pretty much at all, even at home. I mean, showering, bathing, and swimming are about the only times we have bare feet. Just because there's so much disgusting stuff that you can step in, and there's so many ways you can injure your feet when you don't have something protective on your feet. So when you're going through the airport, it's also a very good idea to make sure you have both socks and shoes on, especially when you're going through security. Next important takeaway from that incident: your stuff, your possessions, yes, even your money, even your credit cards, even your cell phone, even your passport, are not worth your life. One of the reasons they said that those people on that plane in Japan survived is because they listened to the crew and they left their stuff behind. People were not trying to get their stuff out of the overhead bins. They were not trying to get stuff from under the seats. They just got off the plane. They left all their stuff behind. I'm sure it was all burned up. Okay, they lost everything. But there is nothing that you have with you, you know, other than like your children, which is a life, or your loved ones, that is worth dying over. Everything you're carrying that isn't alive can be replaced. So leave your stuff. It doesn't matter. You can replace it. Okay, you can't replace yourself. You can't replace your loved ones. So don't try to take your stuff off the plane with you. Okay, this one goes back to something very important that they tell you in the safety announcement when you first board a plane. When they're going through the safety announcement, whether it be the flight attendants doing it or it's on the screen in front of you, one of the things they always tell you is to note the location of your nearest exit, emergency exit, and to remember that your nearest emergency exit may be behind you. I always do this. I always look all around when they say that. It's very nice that they remind you of it. And I figure out where our nearest emergency exit is. And I also count the number of rows between us and that emergency exit. So I have that in my head. It's 5 rows in front of us, or it's 3 rows behind us, or whatever it is. But make sure you know when you get on the plane, where is your closest emergency exit, because you never know when you might have to use it. The last thing from that Japan Airlines incident, the fire, that I want you to remember is don't panic, okay? It would have been easy for the passengers on that flight to be really panicked. I mean, some of them had the presence of mind to even film the fire outside, so that's a little bit of a cultural difference between like Japanese and American people, but everybody remained very calm. If you see video from inside that plane, nobody was screaming. Everybody was quiet so they could listen to the crew's instructions. Remain calm, be quiet, don't panic. If you can do those things like the passengers of that flight did, your chances of survival are much better. So that's the takeaways I wanted you to get from that Japan Airlines fire. Let's go to the other incident that was a few days later on the Alaska Airlines door plug disappearance, okay? This is a really important one. Make sure you keep your seatbelt on. If you're sitting or if you're asleep on a flight, you need to have your seatbelt on. Even if they turn that seatbelt sign off, really all that's telling you, it doesn't mean you don't have to wear your seatbelt. It means that it's safe enough and the flight is smooth enough at that time for you to be able to get up and move around the cabin, stretch your legs, go to the bathroom, etc. But whenever you're sitting in your seat on an airplane, you should always keep your seatbelt on. Now, thankfully on that particular flight, there was no one in the 2 seats closest to where that door plug blew out. But if someone had been sitting there and they didn't have their seatbelt on, it's pretty likely that they would have gotten sucked out of the plane. So if there's ever a breach in cabin pressure, you don't want to be sucked out. So you want to keep your seatbelt on for that reason. Now that's pretty unlikely, but a more common reason that you want to keep your seatbelt on whenever you're sitting in your airplane seat is turbulence. Turbulence is quite common, and turbulence is getting worse due to global warming and climate change. There are some routes in the skies that are worse than others. If you're really concerned about turbulence, this is kind of just a general tip, I would avoid traveling, especially in the afternoon in the summer, okay? Because that's when thunderstorms are. That's when thunderstorms tend to form. That's when the skies tend to be more active. So if you can avoid that time of day, especially in the summer, and summer is getting more loosely defined as, you know, things with the climate change. There's times of day, you can probably research this on your own. There's times of day and certain routes that are going to be more likely to be turbulent than others. So if turbulence really bothers you, that's something that you can look into. But just in case you ever hit turbulence, you want to have your seatbelt on. People have gotten severely injured from turbulence. You know, you can get thrown up into the ceiling and injure your head or your neck. You can get, you know, little children can get thrown from side to side, all sorts of things. You get thrown into the aisle. You can have luggage from the overhead bins fall on you, all sorts of stuff. So you want to make sure that you're secured in your seat so that your risk of injury in cases of turbulence is lessened. Okay, second tip from that Alaska Airlines incident. Cell phones and loose articles. A whole bunch of people on that flight that were holding their phones sucked right out of the plane. They actually found more than one on the ground, and one of them, an iPhone, survived perfectly intact, fell 16,000 feet or whatever it was, and somebody found it and it was fine. And the manufacturer, I can't remember the name of the company, but of that case is like thrilled because, you know, this shows that their phone case works really, really well. But there's a bunch of people who lost their cell phones because they were holding them in their hand, or maybe they were sitting on their tray table or something. They got sucked right out of the airplane. Now this would go for other loose articles. So anything small that you're holding. Now, I don't have my phone in my hand when I'm flying because we fly Delta almost exclusively, and Delta, thankfully, has in-flight entertainment screens. And I have my phone in airplane mode. Once I let like my son, maybe my parents, know that we've boarded and we're on the flight, I put my phone in airplane mode, tuck it back into my bag, and I don't touch it again until the plane lands. That's what I would recommend. If you can go without having your phone or something else valuable like that, that's, you know, that you don't want to lose, not out when you're flying. I mean, you know, you're having your meal service or your snack or whatever. If that stuff gets sucked out, that's not a big deal. You know, even your kid has a coloring book and coloring crayons or something. Those get lost, not the end of the world, okay? But most people really don't want to, cell phones are expensive. They don't want to lose their cell phones. A young boy who was sitting near where the hole ended up being in the side of the plane had the shirt ripped off of his body. And I'm gonna come back to that in a minute, okay? So just loose articles, especially your cell phones, you might wanna really consider not having those out when you're flying. Next tip from that incident on Alaska Airlines, which is also kind of a loose article, if you will, is your baby. I have never recommended people hold their babies in their laps on a flight. I've never done that. My kids have all flown as infants, as young as 6 months old, 3 months old, really young babies. I always buy them a ticket so they have their own seat, and I always take an FAA approved car seat. And they are always in their own seat, strapped in when we fly. That is what I really recommend that you do when you fly with an infant. It's not safe for you or your baby for you to be holding a baby on a flight. Now that doesn't mean, I did take my babies out and nurse them during takeoff and landing to help their ears, but only for the shortest amount of time possible. If your baby takes a Nook or a pacifier or a dummy, as they'd say in the UK, they can use that to suck on, or you can give them a bottle, and you could even give them the bottle right in the car seat. There's 3 things I always think of with babies and people trying to hold their babies on planes. I understand that the reason people do that is probably twofold, but the number one reason I think that people do that is to save money. Children under 2 don't pay airfare if you're holding them in your lap. So most people who do that are doing it because they want to save money. I'm going to tell you right now, flight attendants do not like it. Flight attendants are very nervous when they see a baby being held in a lap. They would much rather that baby be secured in a car seat in their own seat belted into the plane. Okay, which is, again, what I always did. I know that costs more money, but for the safety of your infant, that's what you really ought to do. Okay, the second reason I think is because people think, well, if I'm holding the baby, I can comfort them and all of that. Yes, that's true. But you can still, there's still ways you can comfort your baby and make them feel safe, and they can see, you can put your face right up to their face if you need to, you know, and all sorts of things. You could sing to them or whatever you need to do to help your baby feel calm and safe and secure. So it's really not necessary to be holding them. And then the things that I always think of with a baby being held on an airplane that just hurt my heart. One is going back to that turbulence thing again. If there is severe turbulence on a flight and you're holding your baby, that baby could go flying up to the ceiling, onto the aisle. I mean, I know that sounds horrible, but it could. Your baby could be severely injured or even killed in an incidence of severe turbulence on a flight. You don't want that baby to be loose in your arms. The second one, what is that movie? I can't remember the name right now, but it's about an airplane crash, and it has Jeff Bridges. It's a movie about a plane crash, and there are a certain number of people on the flight that survive, okay? And it kind of focuses, the movie kind of focuses on the reactions of those people to the fact that they survived this plane crash that killed a whole bunch of people. Jeff Bridges' character goes one way. He seems to think that he's now invincible, and he's not afraid of anything. And he's just like, life is the most amazing thing, and nothing bad can happen to me now. I survived this plane crash and all this. The other character, the woman, was holding her baby on the plane, and her baby died in the crash, okay? And she is just absolutely guilt-ridden, and she can't get past the fact that she didn't hold her baby tight enough, and that it's her fault that her baby died. Okay, that's how she's feeling in the movie, and she's just in despair. She feels like it's completely 100% her fault that her baby died, and she didn't hold the baby tight enough. And I think they're like in a support group or something after the flight or whatever, and there's this incredible scene that I can never get out of my head from that movie, where Jeff Bridges is just, she's sobbing like all the time. She just can't get past her grief and sadness over the fact that her baby died in this plane crash. And so in this scene, Jeff Bridges actually puts her in the back seat of his car. He buckles her in like she was on the plane, and he hands her his toolbox, and he says, "This is your baby. Hold your baby as tight as you can. Hold on to it," because she seems to be guilting herself into the fact that she just didn't hold her baby tight enough. And then he drives at full speed into a brick wall. And obviously they both like got whiplash and stuff. But sure enough, even when she knew they were going to crash and she knew she had to hold on to that thing as tight as possible, of course, it still went right out of her arms and through the windshield of the car. So he was proving a point to her. You can't hold your baby tight enough to protect it in a crash. You can't. The force of an airplane stopping that rapidly, there's no way a human strength can hold a child to protect them in a crash. And I never forget that scene. And it actually fixes her. It fixes her despair in the movie because she realizes it wasn't her fault, that there was no way she could have held her baby. That never leaves my brain. Every time I would travel with one of my kids, I always would remember that scene. You've got to protect your kid. The airplane and car seats, if it's a baby or a toddler, are designed to protect your child. Your arms are no replacement. They're just not. And then the third thing, obviously, is from this incident where the side of the plane opened up and the plane got depressurized. I hate to even say it, you don't want your baby to get sucked out of the plane? That's way worse than a cell phone. All right, then going back to that little boy, I think he was a little boy, it just said a boy in the article, that got his shirt sucked off. That reminds me of wearing appropriate clothing on a plane. And one of the things I think that people often don't think about when they fly is planes are cold. We just recently, on our last flight, I think, coming back from from Florida in November, we were in the exit row. And when you're next to the door like that, it's cold. The door and the area, I mean, the side of a plane, even if you have the window seat, it's always cold. You can feel the cold of the atmosphere, because you're 35,000 feet in the air or whatever, is always a little colder than the rest of the plane. The person sitting by the window's always got the coldest seat, but the person by an emergency exit, that's really cold. And like all three of us sitting there, we were all cold. Always make sure that you dress for the fact that planes are cold. Now, sometimes they can get warm too, but that's usually only if you're sitting on the ground for an extended period of time. If you're in the air, the flight's gonna be chilly. So you want to always take something with you or have something on that's long sleeves and warmer. At least have a sweater or a jacket and probably pants. I mean, even if we're going somewhere tropical and I know it's gonna be 95 degrees when we land, I still tell my kids to wear pants or trousers on the plane. And the reason I say that is not only because planes are cold, but again, let's go back to that cleaning thing. They don't have time to clean every seat cushion between flights. Planes are also dirty. You don't want to get stuff on your legs and stuff too. The final episode of Friends always drives me crazy, with Rachel flying to Paris and Ross trying to convince her to stay. That outfit she is wearing, I would never in a million years wear that outfit on a plane. She's wearing a mini skirt, for gosh sakes, and a little short sleeve t-shirt. I would never wear something like that on a plane. And I certainly wouldn't wear it on a transatlantic flight to Paris, okay? So don't wear what Jennifer Aniston's wearing in the series finale of Friends, because that's not appropriate plane attire. Yeah, she looked all stylish, but she's not gonna be very comfortable. So think about how you dress. So you really need long sleeves, or at least the ability to put long sleeves on. You really need trousers, long pants, and you really need shoes. Those three things you should always be wearing on a plane, or at least have something long sleeve to be able to put on. And then the last thing from that Alaska Airlines flight incident is the oxygen masks, okay? They talk about the oxygen masks in this, when the crew or the screen or whatever goes over the safety information. But sadly, going back to my very first thing about listen to the crew, most passengers don't listen to the crew, okay? They don't listen to the safety instructions. They don't pay attention at all. They've got their headphones on, they're reading or asleep or whatever. They're not paying attention. There's three very important things that you need to know about the oxygen masks, okay? If you do pay attention during the safety thing, you'll probably already know this, but I'm just gonna remind you again of the importance with oxygen masks. Number one, if the oxygen mask comes out of the ceiling, put it on, okay? Immediately. If you are wearing a mask, like because of the pandemic or, allergies, cold and flu, whatever. If you, for whatever reason, like we do, wear a mask on flights, take your mask off first and then put your oxygen mask on. But as soon as that thing pops down at you, put it on. And then the second most important thing is always put your own mask on before assisting someone else. So whether that be a young child that you're traveling with, or an elderly person that's sitting next to you that's having trouble with it or something, whoever it is, always put your own mask on first. Why? It does not take very long for even a healthy adult to pass out from lack of oxygen if a plane is depressurized. You need to put that mask on your face as fast as possible. Even if the person you need to help next to you does pass out, you'll still be okay, so you can get the mask on them and then they'll wake back up again. Okay? But if you don't put your own mask on first and you pass out and now your 3-year-old has no mask either, well, now you're both in trouble. That's why you always have to put your own mask on first and put it on as quickly as possible. And then the third thing to know about oxygen masks is they're not meant to be worn for very long. The pilot and the first officer have a completely different type of oxygen mask in the cockpit that lasts a significantly longer amount of time. But the oxygen masks that are in the cabin for the passengers are only meant to last for, it's like 10 minutes. You're not gonna have that thing on very long. The only reason those are there are to keep you from passing out or dying in the few minutes that it takes for the pilot to get the aircraft down to an altitude where you can breathe the air. That's all it's for. So it's kind of like CPR. CPR was never intended to bring people back to life, if you will. CPR is really only intended to have oxygenated blood continue flowing to the person's brain until the ambulance gets there, or until, professional life-saving measures in an emergency room or an ambulance or whatever are put into effect. Okay, it's not meant to be all the forever thing, like it's going to save. Sometimes it does, but it's only meant to be a short-term thing. So that's kind of how oxygen masks on an airplane work too. They're only meant to keep you alive and conscious long enough for the pilot to get that. They're going to drop as quick as they can to get that plane down to an altitude where the passengers can breathe safely. Okay, and then lastly, before I end the video, I want to give you 4 additional general tips for safety on a flight. These are not related to either of the incidents I talked about earlier that were in the news, but these are just general good things to remember whenever you're flying that might make you safer when you fly. The first one is your seat location. There are people who have studied plane crashes, and they know one thing you need to understand about plane crashes is this is kind of a disturbing fact, but it is true. In a plane crash, the truth of the matter is that one of 2 things is most likely to happen. Either everybody survives, like Sully landing on the Hudson, or this flight in Japan where the plane was on fire and everybody survived. In many cases these days, flying is much safer than it was when I was a kid. When I was a kid, we would hear about plane crashes on the news all the time. Planes and flying are much safer than they were 25, 30, 40, 50 years ago. But no matter when it is, the biggest likelihood of what will happen is everyone will survive or everyone will die. It's very unusual to have a plane crash where only a few people survive or only a few people die. I don't even know how that would happen. But that's rare. Reader's Digest actually did a really interesting article a number of years ago about people who were the sole survivor of a plane crash and how unusual that was. Okay, so whether that freaks you out or actually gives you some comfort and reassurance knowing that either we're all going to live or we're all going to die, it's probably going to be one or the other depending on the circumstances. When you see a fatal plane crash, you probably have noticed that when there's a plane crash where people die, it's everybody died. The plane blew up. The plane crashed into a mountain. It was unsurvivable, okay? They probably don't even know what happened to them. But in the unlikely event that you are in a crash, there are different benefits to different seats on the plane, okay? Just like in an automobile, the most dangerous place in an automobile is the passenger seat in the front. That's something they can study. Similar thing in a plane. I'm going to tell you about 3 places you can sit in a plane and the benefits to it. If you are sitting in the front of the plane, the advantage of sitting in the front of the plane is that it's the nicest, okay? It's the nicest up there. It's the most comfortable. You get the best service. It's just nice, okay? Whether you're in first class or business class or premium economy or whatever it is, the closer you are to the front of the plane, the nicer it's going to be. The disadvantages, there's 2 major disadvantages to sitting in the front of the plane. Number 1, it's also the most expensive because it's the nicest. And number 2, the people sitting in the front of the plane, including the flight crew, are the most likely to perish in a crash. That's just a fact. If you're in the front of the plane and there's a crash, you're most likely to die. So it's nice when you're flying, but if there's a crash, that's not where you want to be sitting. All right, the middle of the plane, specifically over the wings or near the wings. If you have a problem with turbulence or you prefer to have a smooth flight, that's where you want to be sitting. If you want to be comfortable, if you get air sick, anything like that, you want to be as close to the wing or right over the wing as possible. Because an airplane kind of, it's like on a level on a fulcrum or whatever, the middle, just like on a ship too, same thing. Mid-ship is always the smoothest and you're going to feel the least motion. It's exactly the same on an airplane. If you get air sick or you don't want to be bothered by turbulence or anything like that, if you want a smooth flight, you want to be in the middle. Another advantage to the middle, although this is true in the front and the back too, depending on the aircraft, is you're probably pretty close to the emergency exit doors and you can walk right out on the wing. That was what happened when Sully had to land on the Hudson, was everybody had to go out on the wings because you couldn't go out the other doors because you're going to be in the water. So there can be an advantage from an escape evacuation standpoint too, to being in the middle. The rear of the plane. Nobody ever wants to sit in the rear of the plane. That's the cheap seats. You tend to have a lot of babies and young children and families back there. You also tend to be near the bathroom, which can be noisy or maybe smelly. And it tends to be loud because you get a lot of engine noise in the back. And it might be hard to hear and like talk to each other or hear your movie or whatever. But the back of the plane is the safest. When there is a crash and only some people survive, the people who survive are almost always in the back. So you can take those things about different seat locations and determine what is most important to you and help that guide your decision when you pick your seat for a flight. Okay, second general tip for safety with flying is if you're traveling with someone, make a little plan in case of separation. Because like for example, with the Japan Airlines fire, like I said, everybody left their stuff. They don't have cell phones to text each other. Now, hopefully if you're evacuating, they're gonna keep like everybody together and stuff, but you might have to come up with some kind of like backup plan in case you ever did get separated. There could be a lot of scenarios that this could happen. Just like sort of have something in place that you would do, or where you would go, where you would meet, how you would communicate if you don't have your phones, or they're too young to have a phone or something like that. Explain, this is just anytime you're separated from a child, explain to them, you look for someone in a uniform, look for someone with a name tag, something like that. There's tips like that are kind of general, but anytime really that you're traveling, you always want to have some kind of backup plan like this in case you get separated and you can't communicate by phone. Third one, a really important tip. Somebody who's not traveling with you always needs to have your flight information. For me, it's 9 times out of 10, it's my son, Andrew, because we're often traveling without him. Same thing for him when he travels a lot without us. So he will send me his flight information. What flight is he on? What are the times? Stuff like that. And we also always tell each other, I'm on the plane and I've landed. So we know. We'd also probably tell each other like flight was delayed or whatever too. But just a quick text, just easy to share that information. Doesn't take long, but make sure somebody at home, somebody who's not traveling with you, always knows what flight you're on. Because if something happened to that flight and nobody knows that you're on that airplane, nobody's gonna know what happened to you. And then the last one, a lot of people take this really seriously. I've never really worried about it that much, although I might kind of watch it now that the thing happened with Alaska Airlines. If you're a really nervous flyer, this might be something that you want to pay attention to, but it would be both the airline that you're flying on, because some have better safety records than others. Some also have better on-time records than others, which might be important to you, and the type of aircraft that you're on. So you can research the type of aircraft, and there might be some, like that particular plane that they grounded. The FAA grounded all of those planes that were like that one on Alaska Airlines with the door plug blew out. And it's caused quite a problem for United, because United has a lot of those planes. And quite a few people got stranded after they grounded all those planes because there was no other aircraft type available to them. I read about one woman in Hawaii to get her back home again or whatever. So you can research different types of aircraft, and then you can always, and see, I've never done this, so I don't even know where you look, but somehow there's usually a way that you can determine what type of aircraft your upcoming flight is going to be. If nothing else, you can ask at the airport. you know, the gate agent, the ticketing agent, whatever, they should know what type of aircraft you're getting on. So if that's something that you're really picky about and you just don't want to fly on this airline, well, obviously don't take that airline, or you absolutely don't want to fly on this particular type of aircraft, then you can avoid it. That hasn't ever really been an issue for me. I don't really worry about it too much, but if that's something that bothers you, that's definitely another thing that you could do to make yourself a safer flyer. So there you go. I know this was a long video. I know I gave you a lot of information. I know some of the things I talk about are kind of disturbing and upsetting, but I just want you to be aware of the things that you personally can do yourself to make your flying experience as safe and comfortable as possible. So that even if something goes wrong, like these two news stories that we talked about, even if something like that happens, you're better prepared and you're more likely to come out of it okay. I really hope this video was helpful to you. If you did find it helpful or you appreciated this information that I provided in this video, I would really appreciate it if you would give the video a thumbs up. And if you don't want to miss any more helpful travel tips or travel vlogs, make sure you're subscribed to the channel and ring the notification bell so you get notified of each new video that I put out. Thank you for joining me for this video, and safe travels.